Good afternoon, and welcome to Eno's Rapid Response webinar. Today, we're focused on the 1.5 trillion with a T Omnibus Appropriations package. Eno is an independent, nonpartisan, and nonprofit think tank. And this webinar, like all our webinars, aims to help us achieve our vision of a transportation system that fosters economic vitality, advances social equity, and improves the quality of life for all. My name is Karen Price, and I'm the Chief Development Officer here at Eno. And before I turn it over to Jeff Davis, the Senior Fellow and Editor of ETW here at Eno, and of course, the man you actually all came to hear from, just a couple of housekeeping items. You can enter questions in the box at the side of your screen at any time, and we'll get to as many of them as possible during the Q&A. And of course, we don't expect any tech issues, but if you do experience any, there's a help icon in the lower left of your screen that you can click if you experience any issues. And we also have a brand new feature, reactions. There's the reactions on the bottom of your screen. And you can give us real-time feedback during the webinar about how things are going. So Eno is happy to offer this webinar series free of charge. And so if you enjoy our webinars and are interested in supporting Eno's work, you can check out the link in the chat box or the little pop-up that just came up to donate or become a member. And you can find the slides and a recording of the website on our website, the webinar on our website, enotrans.org. And we'll email this recording to everyone within the next day. And so with that, I will I'll take myself out of the way and turn it over to Jeff.
Thank you very much, Karen. It's been a busy last day and a half. The 3,000 some page series of documents that comprise the Omnibus spending package were released to the public at 1:30 a.m. yesterday morning. And so some of us got to wait up around for it, stay up all night reading it and writing it, and then get some sleep here and there, contributing to the gray hairs that are developing here that some of you can see. It passed after a day of fits and starts in the House, during which the COVID aid had to be removed from the bill because a lot of revolt from the Democratic caucus as to the pay for that COVID aid, which was going to be repeal of some previous COVID aid, including $2 billion of unspent money from the aviation manufacturing payroll support program, and about $9 billion from the last tranche of general purpose state and local financial aid. That was what blew it up. The National Governors Association called the alarm on that, and a lot of Democrats went to the speaker saying, we can't support this bill if you're going to take this money that our states have been promised in the future back. Even though some of the states are doing stupid things with it, as with last night in Florida, the state legislature agreed to spend $200 million of their American Rescue Plan money to pay for a 1-month gas tax holiday. Not now, but in the month of October, conveniently the month before the election. So that's where the money's going, but you can't call it back. So anyway, the COVID aid was dropped. It was reintroduced as a bill with no pay for. The House will pass that next week. The rest of the omnibus package minus the COVID aid passed last night, went to the Senate. They don't have 100 votes for it, and a couple of people are going to try to hold it up. So they also passed a 4-day extension of the stopgap appropriations that are supposed to expire tomorrow night. So that'll clear. That'll go to the president, get them to Tuesday. Even if everyone who hates this bill does every single thing they can do to block it, it'll still pass by Tuesday. We're going to avert a government shutdown in all likelihood. So we've just got to see if the Senate is going to allow its distaste for working weekends to overcome these members who want to slow things down or not. They may vote Saturday, they vote Monday or Tuesday. They'll vote. It'll be done. By the way, this is who I am. So first of all, the big picture about the financial situation here. All these, it's an omnibus. It's got all 12 appropriations bills in it and 20 some other unrelated bills. Some big, like the intelligence authorization. Some very, very small, all granted one big take it or leave it package. They got what's called a global deal on the spending. Last year, the basic appropriations levels before the add-ons like disaster relief and wildfires and a couple of odds and ends were 671.5 for defense, and 626.5 for non-defense. That's what all the annual appropriations in the bills added up to. This year, the House Democrats wanted an increase from that, 14.5 on defense, and a huge $109 billion increase in non-defense. Senate Democrats weren't willing to go that far, but they wanted to go more in defense, so and less on non-defense. So they wanted to go plus 37 defense, plus 86 non-defense. In order to get Republican buy-in, what was necessary to get the 10 plus votes to pass these bills in the Senate, and they also got buy-in from several key House Republicans as well to not gum things up. They wound up going with a plus 41.5 defense number because, again, things in the international situation have changed since the president released his budget and last year, and even some people who had been defense skeptics are now, with what's happening in Ukraine, agreeing you need more defense money. And only $54.5 billion of a non-defense increase. Still a lot, but it's half of what Democrats had wanted, almost precisely, actually. I hadn't noticed that, but now that I look at it, yes, 54.5 is exactly half of 109. I put these numbers together myself because CB hadn't scored it yet, and because that's exactly 50%, I know I'm right. But in exchange for going even that high on non-defense, the GOP managed to get a veto on all proposed new policy provisions in the bill. So basically, they're still keeping the same policy riders that were in the bill in 2017, some of which date back in the 1970s, proposed by Democrats to get rid of longstanding policy riders on abortion, immigration, Guantanamo Bay, policing, marijuana in the District of Columbia, all got dropped. So that was the price to pay for $28 extra billion in domestic spending that Republicans otherwise wouldn't have wanted to give. You got money or policy. Dems chose money. So you got that $96 billion total increase over last year. And then of that $96 billion, 6.4 of that was given to the Transportation HUD Appropriations Subcommittee. And then Chairman Price and Chairman Schatz had to subdivide that. And HUD always gets to go first because HUD has these housing vouchers that subsidize people's rent. And that rent goes up for inflation. Inflation, well, it's getting and rent's a big part of inflation now. Rent's going up so much. So, and you can't cut that. It goes up by what it goes up, the inflation, and you can't cut it without throwing people who are in public housing now out on the street, and no one's willing to do that. So the HUD Section 8 vouchers always get to go first when you're trying to divide up the increase that you get. So as a result of that, mostly, and the huge pent-up desire for community development fund earmarks, because the Democratic Party particularly is very urban now, and those CDBG earmarks are just all-purpose. You can do anything you want, within a city, basically. So $4.7 billion of that $6.4 billion increase went to HUD, and $1.6 billion of the increase went to DOT, the annual appropriations. Now, that $1.6 billion, that takes them to about 27 for DOT. This was $229 million less than the House bill had been, and $2.2 billion less than the Senate bill, which you would think would normally be a problem. But the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, alias the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, came along out of the blue and made things right, because it had so much money in it that the Omnibus cut raised grants and FAA capital and Fed state partnerships below last year's level, because there's so much money from the IIJ on top of that. It's raining gravy anyway, and they're not going to notice those reductions. And so again, that's this omnibus, once the president signs it, hopefully by Tuesday, will allow the IIJA to be fully implemented. Once he signs it, all the legal barriers to full implementation of the IIJA's funding levels for fiscal 22 will be gone. And a little asterisk there, because there was that federal court decision in the U.S. District Court in Louisiana that put an injunction against the Biden administration's social cost of carbon interim standard. And so as a result of that, any pending federal rulemaking or notice of funding opportunity that was relying on that social cost of carbon standard is also on hold for a while. So there's a question as to some of the IIJ rulemakings. If they're relying on a social cost of carbon standard, they're going to have to wait for the injunction to go or the full-time carbon standard to come out. But aside from that court case, once the bill is signed, nothing is left to hold up the full implementation of the IIJA. So you should see the full year-long highway obligation limitation and the full year-long mass transit apportionments go out within a couple of weeks. And new programs like that were funded by the Highway Trust Fund, like the Carbon Reduction Program and the Protect Resiliency Grant Program at FHWA, can be implemented now once this bill is signed into law, because there had been a provision in the CR saying you can't do new things. And then any other new rulemakings, new studies, and whatever ordered by the IIJA can be commenced. DOT has been working on some of these things without actually working on. They've been, preparing themselves to figure out exactly what they will need to do to hit the ground running on these things once the president signs it, and they can actually start working on it. So that'll hopefully happen starting next week. Here's total U.S. budget authority, the U.S. DOT budget authority. And I started in 2017 because that was the last year that President Obama had to negotiate a budget with the Hill. And once Trump came in, Republicans just followed him, and he didn't care how much money they spent. So you can see how much regular appropriations went up from 19.5 to 27.5 in that first Trump budget deal. Katie barred the door. And so then you had a sort of plateau, you had a steady $1 billion or so a year bump in contract authority from the FAST Act 2015, and then it flatlined with the extension. Regular appropriations do normal, and then now you've got a huge jump in the contract authority to 76.7, a healthy bump in the annual appropriations from the Omnibus that's pending right now, and then $36.9 billion in advance appropriations from the Infrastructure Act. So you've gone from a DOT that was in the mid 80s each year for its total funding to now they're about a 141 this year, with all things all in. So that is the scale of what's been going on in the DOT, in the Omnibus and in IIJ together versus what we've had for the last 5 years. And here are the funding increases all in, regular plus IIJA by U.S. DOT mode. I only exclude the mandatory EA essential air services funded by overflight fees because of COVID and now Ukraine and no one knows how many planes are going to be flying over the U.S. using our airspace, so that has been really in flux, and no one's quite sure what's up with that. And then I don't include the pipeline fee offsets either. So gross appropriations, FAA all in is a 30% increase over last year. Highways 43, maritime with that grant program 48. Although I'll explain later that'll drop next year because this is the last year of the school ship replacement. Mass transit 58% increase. Safety, which I grouped motor carriers and NITs and pipelines together in one line because I didn't want to shrink the chart. 53% increase. I should reverse those, I guess. Office of the Secretary, between raised grants, the new mega project grants, the new Safe Streets grants, the Miss Cantwell's salmon culvert grants that are in the OST for some reason, wherever else, and Essential Air Service discretionary, they're up 222% over last year. They're really getting a grant-making factory going there in the Office of the Secretary. And then it is raining gravy at the Federal Railroad Administration. They had a 486% funding increase this year over last year. 486%. It's just jaw-dropping. So they are the clear winner in this, and that is as you would expect. President Amtrak Joe wanted it that way. There you go. Elections have consequences. So, and then in terms of the modal makeup of DOT, last year you can see, highways versus combined transit and rail versus aviation versus other. And I was up here with a ruler trying to make the 2022 proportionately bigger. I'm not sure if I quite got it right, but you can see that in addition to getting bigger, the highway and the highways is now, and I was meaning FHWA, not motor carrier also. Is now only about half of the budget authority at DOT in 2022, all in with IIJ and regular, versus a much larger percentage last year because of those massive increase in rail. So that's the other little chart I'm proud of. I don't have much graphic sense. I got to work more on putting really cool charts together, as you'll see. The other thing is that earmarks are back. The House Appropriations Bill had $507.5 million in earmarks. The Senate had $953.2 million, and if you add those both together, you get about $1.48 billion. So So the combined total is almost exactly what you would have gotten if you just added the House and Senate total together. It's like $6.8 million difference. So they basically just took everyone's stuff and didn't change it much. I should mention that all of the earmarks are money that is appropriated directly by the omnibus. They used the appropriations committees used to earmark contract authority money for competitive grant programs at DOT. They may do that again someday. They're not doing it in this bill. So all of the earmarks are out of appropriations made directly by this bill. They're not being deducted out of any other program from the IIJA. So you can see that, they have $850 million almost in highway earmarks, 201 in transit, 279 in airport grants, 121 for rail grants from CRISI, and then some people found $7 million of the stuff to earmark out of the Transport Planning R&D account in the Office of the Secretary. I always go through and find the biggest ones, and for the most part, all the House earmarks were like $2 to $5 million mostly. Some of the Senate earmarks got bigger than that, so here are all the ones that were over $10 million. And you see the name of the retiring Senator Richard Shelby from Alabama at the top, the ranking member of the Senate Appropriations Committee. And he had a $100 million airport grant for the downtown Mobile General Aviation Airport, and then a $67.3 million CRISI grant for the Port of Mobile. And this is on top of $100 million he got there last year that somehow evaded the earmark ban for a combination project with that downtown Mobile Airport and the port. And this is important in other reasons because Shelby and the people and the city rulers of Mobile have this vision of the Port of Mobile becoming a full-on world-class intermodal port, and that includes CSX Railway. And so they're doing all this activity, putting hundreds of millions of dollars towards intermodal connectivity between that downtown airport and the port itself, which is a big reason why CSX and the Mobile politicians are fighting against Amtrak and the Mississippi politicians before the Surface Transportation Board on whether or not Amtrak should be allowed to have more resume service to the Gulf Coast to Mobile. This is what that's about. It's not just about CSX just not wanting to deal with it. It's also about Shelby pouring all this money into a vision for that CSX line in Mobile that they don't want passenger traffic clogging it up. Beyond that, you've got $30 million for John Thune for I-85 and I-29 and 85th Street interchange Sioux Falls. $27.7 million from Ms. Murkowski in Alaska for what the Alaska DOT website says is an 11-mile gravel road on Cape Baldwin Peninsula, way up in the north. It's $23 million for Senator Schatz to relocate a little two-lane stretch of the Honopiliani Highway that runs the west coast of Maui. And so let's all just take a moment for the great sympathy we have for the Schatz staff that had to go out and inspect this project on the beach in West Maui. It's like the coastal highway there for the most part. Tough being those oversight people. So the Blumenthal had $15 million in Norwalk, Connecticut to do some demo and redo some bridges that were interfering with transit. Roy Blunt had $13 million for a bridge between Chester, Illinois, and Perryville, Missouri, across the Mississippi, the mighty Mississippi. And then Susan Collins always has some kind of CRISI grant there. This one's for improvements on the Maine Northern Railroad. And now looking at this bill sort of mode by mode, let's start with the big one, highways. And so I've got these little charts here that are just showing, the tables that are showing last year and then FY22 regular, and that includes, it's all in. That's regular appropriations, contract authority from trust fund, and IIJ advance. And so, we're going from 49.1 to 70.1. So a $21 billion increase, 42%. You can sort of see roughly there what the proportions are. The omnibus again gives $2.4 billion out of general revenues in addition to the contract authority. And after you take those $800 million in earmarks off, the big thing was a $1.15 billion in additional general fund bridge formula money on top of the $5.3 billion in general fund bridge formula money that went out from the IIJ on January 14th. They're not the same program. They're a little different. The IIJA formula was like the old bridge program pre-2012. It's based on estimated cost to replace or repair bridges, and it was like 75-cent replacement of poor condition bridges and 25% cost of repairing fair condition bridges. The Omnibus formula is like it was in the last couple of years. It is just solely based on each state's share of square meters of deck area of poor and fair condition bridges. And then there's like there's I think a $40 million state maximum, $6 million state minimum, and some other things like that. So it's not the same program, but it serves much the same purpose. It's a different formula as as the IIJA money. And the Omnibus, and then the other part that goes out of that 2.4 billion, there's they're doubling the size of the competitive portion of the new Protect Resiliency Grant program. It's mostly formula-based program, but there's $250 million in IIJA contract authority for competitive grants, and the Omnibus will put another $250 million towards that. Beyond that, there's nothing in there that interferes with IIJA priorities or anything like that. So it's a pretty clean, no new general provisions that I can see that we're going to interfere with anything. Next, you've got mass transit, and again, FTA has a huge benefit in contract authority and the IIJ events. Not much of a change in regular appropriations. There's reasons for that, because first of all, FTA administrative expenses were about 120 million a year out of the general fund, but the IIJA changed things, so now those are paid out of the trust fund. So the appropriators don't have to pay that anymore. The Omnibus gave an extra $250 million out of that, after the earmarks for competitive bus grants, 175 for diesel buses and 75 for zero emission buses. And then WMATA gets its full 150 million. But those are the other general fund accounts. When you're talking general fund and the annual appropriations bills, you're mostly talking each year about new starts, just a second. Capital investment grants, I mean. And so a separate sheet for that, the CIG program. It got $2 billion last year. The Senate, they got 2.25 this year in the Omnibus, which was the Senate number. And that's augmented by another 1.6 billion from the IIJA. So it's basically 3.85 versus 2.0. It's a 91% increase in available funding. You can see that and part of the reason that $2 billion was enough last year without promoting, howls of complaint from various cities, and that no one really had a complaint about 2.25 in the Senate bill months ago, is that they're right this minute, there aren't enough qualified projects that'll be ready to go and have funding grant agreements by September 30th that could use any more money. We've got, again, hopefully having 1.6 a year guaranteed for 5 years in the IIJA on top of whatever the appropriators come up with each year will inspire more people to come forward with projects over the next couple of years that could use that. But you can see, right now they figured that everything on that regular column, everything that could be done by September 30th is in that regular column. 1.5 for new starts, most of which are ongoing, 345 for core capacity, 321.5 for small starts, $100 million for Shannon Hines' expedited project delivery pilot, and the oversight set aside. So, and then the IIJ percentages of how that 1.6 is built up. There's some flexibility in there, I think, if I remember correctly. They can change that by like 5 or 10%, depending each year, depending on what the difference of the modes is, based on the requests are from new starts versus core capacity versus small starts. And of course, I would say they of course include all the relevant general provisions from last year, including the one that suspends the Rust and Kautsky test, so that the fact that the the mass transit account is ludicrously underfunded compared to where its outlays are, won't cause any kind of automatic funding cut this year that otherwise would. Railroads, the really surprising thing here is that because the 13.2 billion from the IIJ was so darn much money. I'd been kind of expecting the appropriators to kind of take their foot off the throttle, because there's realistically, there's no way that you can, that a $2.5 to 2.7 to $2.75 billion a year agency can digest 13.2 billion dropped on top of them in the first year. But no, the Appropriations Committee actually put another 504 increase on top of last year, on top of the 13.2 billion. I was very surprised by that. They did not, however, express any love for maglev grants or the rail restoration enhancement grants. So those two grant programs that have been getting like 5, 10, 20 million a year the last couple of years, those are out. But I did a separate slide here for the remaining railroad grant programs. And you can see that the Appropriations Committees, put like 670 million extra each in Amtrak Northeast Corridor and Amtrak National Network compared to what they had last year, on top of all this extra money for capital backlog from the IIJA. For crazy grants, they went from 375 to 625. Some of that was earmarked, some of it was, but a lot was not. Combined with the $1 billion from IIJ for 1.6, and they even put an extra 100 million on top of the 7.2 billion for the IPR grants to make it 7.3. It's not, not really necessary, but they did it anyway. And then there's, like I mentioned, there's 600 million in the IIJA for, I believe, grade crossings that the appropriators chose not to supplement. But those are significant Amtrak increases, completely independent of IIJA. Aviation. FAA, you can see that they had a $495 million increase in their regular budget through the Omnibus Appropriations. The Airport Improvement Program contract authority is $3.35 billion. That's been set in stone by the authorization in 2018. That's not until next year. It's been frozen in stone for a long time. And then you have the $5 billion from the IIJA on top of that. $1 billion for facilities and equipment, $3 billion for traditional airport improvement program grants, airside, and $1 billion for the new program for airport surface terminals and connections to ground transportation, which had previously not been eligible for airport improvement grant funding. So of the 495 increase in regular appropriations, 267 was the air traffic organization for the annual salary bump for the controllers mostly, and a $57 million increase in aviation safety. You combine, and they were able to cut back somewhat on the facilities and equipment budget, the appropriation of the omnibus, because of that extra $1 billion in the IIJA. And the explanatory statement that's online actually says, as a list of where that first $1 billion in IIJ money for 22 facilities equipment went. And then you can line it up next to the programming of their 2.7 or whatever it was for the out of the omnibus. So you combine that $1 billion and the regular IIJ and the portion that goes to non-air traffic control facilities and equipment, a lot of the other stuff at airports, is $550 million over last year. And then air traffic control facilities and equipment, these are the PPA levels below the account, are $272 million above last year. So you combine it, F&E is doing all right. And then if you look at the actual amount of grants, after all the set-asides for Office of Airports and research and whatever else are taken out, you have the contract authority, the $3 billion IIJA, advanced preparation, and the general fund component in the omnibus. The actual airside grants being made by the airport program will double this year from last year. Go from $3.17 billion last year to $6.34 billion this year, precisely doubling. Plus the $279 million in airside earmarks. So this is a big, big year for the airport improvement program. Office of the Secretary. Oh, it's actually aviation, but it's in the Office of the Secretary. They put $350 million as an appropriation out of the annual budget for the essential air service subsidies, because they had to go up because the mandatory side of the program that is paid for by those fees paid by airliners that fly over the U.S. without landing have been kind of up in the air because of COVID and Russia and who knows. Multimodal, etc. You see that the regular appropriation of the Office of the Secretary went down. That's because they raised grants, the regular appropriation, from $1 billion last year to $775 billion this year. But that combines with $1.5 billion in IIJA, so the usable amount goes from $1 billion to $2.275 billion. So it's not that big a deal. You have a new $1 billion mega project funding amount in the IIJA that they're working on. And what they're doing supposedly is that $1 billion in mega project funding is going to be combined with the total of $1.64 billion in contract authority and advanced appropriations from the IIJA, and the $300 million contract authority rural highway competitive grant program from IIJA into one big $4 billion notice of funding opportunity that should be coming up very soon. It's going to let municipalities apply for the money, and then they will slot their grants towards whatever one of those three programs they feel could most appropriately provide the money. And there's also, there's a $25 million appropriation for a Thriving Communities program, it's different than the Reconnected Communities program that's in IIJA. It's Thriving Communities is basically just a system of planning grants for underprivileged communities to allow them to use to better position themselves to plan for better transportation and then be able to fill out the applications for it better in the future. It's kind of it's like the planning grants that people are including as part of RAISE, but it's a more systematic approach to it. And there's also in the Office of the Secretary $10 million to refund the risk premiums for RIF loan cohort 3, which is basically the Denver Union Station loan that Denver wants their risk premium they pay back now that they pay the loan back. Can't blame them. There's some weird problems with the RIF being able to repay the risk premium. So that's finally in there as well. They're lobbyists who we know well can take it easy. And then in road safety, motor carriers get a 46.6% increase. There's no extra appropriations in there in the omnibus bill. It's entirely IIJA money, and they retain in the bill the livestock hauler exemption from the electronic logging device mandate for another. It's been in there like 3 or 4 years now. Congress keeps voting for it because Congress keeps voting for it because of the members in agricultural districts, and I think people are afraid to not let it pass. So they don't want the visual. If something goes wrong, they don't want a visual of some truck full of dead and dying cattle driving through a city or something. So that's in there another year. There's not much difference in the NHTSA budget from what was planned. The $200 million of the regular appropriation for NHTSA in here is the same amount basically that was authorized by IIJA, suggested by IIJA. But what's really going to be revolutionary at NHTSA is that new money in the advanced appropriations, $150 million a year for crash data, better crash data collection, and $110 million a year for vehicle safety. When the amount of vehicle safety money they've been getting for all of this has been, $150 to $190 million a year for like the last 5 or 6 years. I mean, adding the extra money on top 5 years in a row is promised to be really transformative for the way NHTSA deals with and plans for vehicle safety in the future. I'm still going through the bill. That's about all I put together here in the last 36 hours. Oh, wait, no, one more slide here. I forgot the ports and pipes. MARAD is, up 47.6%. As I mentioned, the omnibus provided $234 million for the port infrastructure grants, and that combines with the $450 million from the IIJA. The program is going to total $684 million in fiscal 2022. You're going to see the regular appropriations for MARAD drop in 2023 because this year is the 5th year and final year of the program to fund the replacement of the training vessels used by the 5 state maritime academies. So This year should be enough to pay for vessel number 5. They're several $100 million a piece. So starting next year, that's going to go that once in a generation need is going to go back down. I will say, you probably saw the inflation announcements today. There were several mentions in the MARAD statement of managers about how the inflation and the cost of steel has messed with the missile buying program. There's also suggestions in there making sure that MARAD gets the top price they can for scrap steel from the old ready reserve fleet vessels they're going to scrap and sell for, because inflation in the price of steel is a real thing. And then over at Pipeline and Hazmat, it's pretty much the same. That extra $200 million a year grant program to cities and counties to deal with publicly owned leaky natural gas pipes hasn't gone into effect yet. And that was the last slide. And now we'd be glad to take any questions.
Excellent. And you know what, Jeff? There are a lot of questions. So you ready to get started?
Sure.
So one basic one about sort of the process first. Can you explain how advanced appropriations work? For example, why are they called advanced if they're coming so late in the fiscal year?
Okay. The IIJ was actually an appropriations bill that also had other stuff in it. But Division J of the IIJ was all appropriations. It was enacted into law November 15th. It was enacted into law in fiscal 2022. And it contained all this money. And for DOT, the money was tranched out to become available over 5 years. 20% was going to become available the day the bill was signed into law, or October 1st, whichever came first, came second, because it was done last summer. The next 20% will spring into being in availability October 1st, 2022, and then 23, 24, and then October 1st, 2025. They're called advanced appropriations because they were enacted into law in years in advance of when they will actually become available. This has always been possible. For public works in particular, people have always wanted multi-year certainty. When the mass transit program was starting out, they didn't have access to contract authority at first in the 60s. And so they worked out a deal with them. So they would get their appropriations 1 year in advance. So the FY 1967 appropriations bill had their 1968 appropriations. So they knew a year in advance, guaranteed what their money was going to be. Similarly, there's a bunch of the entire Veterans Administration health system runs 1 year in advance. $4.4 billion a year of HUD is 1 year. This year's every year the transportation HUD bill, $4.4 billion of the fiscal 22 bills HUD money becomes available in 2023, and so this is the IIJ money are real appropriations that have been enacted or on the books, but years 2, 3, 4, and 5 are not going to be able to be used until they spring into existence in October 1st of those years. So they're distinct from annual appropriations because they're supposed to be made in advance. And again, technically the FY22 IIJ money isn't advanced because it wasn't signed until after October 1st. But they thought the bill was going to be signed in July or August. So they were originally created. Originally, the FY22 share was going to be advanced as well. But 23, 24, 25, 26 are definitely going to be advanced appropriations. So they are just as reliable as future contract authority. They're enacted on the books, and you'd have to pass a special law to repeal them to stop them from coming into being.
And so a lot of folks are sort of wondering about the timeline. How long does it take for these monies to go from the Treasury to the DOT and sort of trickle down to the states and localities? When can people start to see the effects of some of these bills?
OMB usually gets the stuff turned around within a couple of weeks to agencies, but for the most part, for most of the highway and transit spending, the actual budget authority, the contract authority, was provided the day IIJA was signed, a full year's worth. It's just that the appropriations bill every year has sort of a limiter that goes on top. I used to call it like the restrictor plate on a carburetor that's in NASCAR. But it limits how much you can burn at any one time on the money you have. And that was prorated to a part of the year. It was prorated to a portion of the last year's level, and based on how many days of the year the CR covered. So there's a full year of money available, but there was something in the old CR that you could only use 4.5 months worth of it. So now, within 2 weeks, that will be lifted, and the states will be given their full year ability to use the money that was provided on October 1st. For all that Highway Contract Authority and all the Transit Formula Contract Authority, in 2 weeks or so, they should have that all ready to go for the year. No more restrictions. The new appropriations provided by the IIJA, by the Omnibus, the New Start money, the raise grants, etc., those should be legally released in a couple of weeks. And the thing is that in some instances, like with raise, I believe, for example, DOT has already put out the NOFO for raise based on the $1.5 billion in advance appropriations from IIJA that are already available. And they mentioned in there, go ahead and start applying. We're going to increase the amount of money that's in there once the appropriations bill with the rest of it comes through. But the application, there was no need to hold up the applications waiting on the last third of the money to come in. They're already processing the applications, and then there's just the extra money will top that off. So that's and I think there were a couple of other NOFO. I think maybe NOLO bus was. If I didn't miss it, there were bus announcements last week based on the IIJ money, and then the extra money that's being appropriated by the omnibus will just be added to that. But there was no need to hold up the application process waiting on it.
Excellent. And there's quite a few questions if there's any funding anywhere in this bill for high-speed rail.
There is nothing in there that has to be high-speed rail, but there's $7.2 billion in the IIJA that is for interest for new intercity passenger rail corridor development improvement, and high-speed rail is eligible for that money. So is Amtrak, so is regular speed rail, but they're eligible for it. They're not reserved specifically for them. Remember that the Build Back Better reconciliation bill is still not completely dead. Like I said in Princess Bride, mostly dead, not completely dead. It had $10 billion for high-speed rail only, and there's still a chance. I'm saying there's a chance that that could come through, and that would be high-speed rail only. But right now, there's nothing in IIJ or this bill that is just high-speed rail only.
And quite a few folks are wondering if they can find a list of all of the earmarks online somewhere. Like, where would they go to find a list of all of them?
I tell you what, you go to docs, short for documents, .house.gov, and click on bills to be considered this week, and it scroll down and it says Joint Explanatory Statement Division L. That's the Transportation HUD division. And you scroll down in there, and about half, and then towards the end, there's a big list of all the DOT earmarks first, and then all the HUD earmarks. But it's in that piece of paper. So it's the explanatory statement for Division L, the Transportation HUD division, and it's on docs.house.gov website.
Okay. And you specifically mentioned the ability to implement the carbon reduction program and protect as being implementable immediately now. Why are those specific programs tied to the omnibus? And do we know anything more about the timelines and priorities for those?
Since October 1st, the federal government has been functioning on a short-term continuing resolution. And Section 104 of that resolution basically says that you agencies, you can't do anything under the CR, any new programs, projects, or activities that you weren't doing on September 30th with last year's money. And the lawyers at DOT determined that even though the IIJA was enacted after this, after the CR on November 15th, the fact that the obligation limitation applies to contract authority meant that DOT couldn't start any of the new IIJA programs that were funded by contract authority until while the CR was ongoing. And so they apportioned all of the money in December, all the highway formula money, including the carbon reduction grant money and the protect money. But it said states, you can't use it until we get permission from the CR and get the rules for it out or whatever, because we, so that's it. So states have had the money for carbon reduction and protect on their books since December, but can't use it because of the no new starting provision of the CR. Once Biden signs the omnibus, that provision will be lifted and they should be able to proceed with it. So that was a particular weird lawyer thing with the CR.
And some questions about the New Starts program. Is the FTA still requiring the NEPA process for that program, and has the threshold changed?
Hasn't changed yet. I think there was some language in the joint statement of managers for this suggesting that they look at changing it. Let me see. But I don't. Yeah, I'm honestly not sure about that. There's been discussion about changing it, but I don't know yet if they have amended the guidance or not.
So somebody has a question about freight lines and how they can find a place in the TOD-oriented plans. So major hubs such as at Nashville for CSX, Chicago, BNSF, and UP and Houston need a lot of infrastructure. Is there a need for railroads to educate the public, or how does that interact with this bill? The freight lines and infrastructure.
Traditionally, the class ones have been very hesitant about asking the federal government for too much money to upgrade their own infrastructure that they own, because they're always afraid of the strings that will come with it. I mean, there was the original round of Tiger grants with in 2009. There was a couple of them, the Crescent Corridor and the Heartland Corridor, two big, one for CSX, one for Norfolk Southern rail corridors that got a lot of money, for freight related improvements. But the degree to which the Obama DOT insisted on them doing more passenger rail friendly stuff, in other areas in exchange for that, infuriated them so much. And I know we had to stop dealing with DOT for years because of that. I'm not sure what the other stuff. So for various reasons, they've been hesitant. But more education is always a good thing. And again, I'm not sure, but honestly, I haven't followed that one enough.
So do you know if there's a time frame for the obligation of the earmarked funds?
No, I'm pretty sure that they are no year appropriations, available till expended. But there has been a provision they've included in the annual appropriations bill for years now, and it's in this one again, that says that if you haven't spent at least 15% of your money in 10 years, they'll take it away. Or you basically have, if the project's not moving forward significantly within 10 years, there's a provision in the bill that will automatically scoop the money up and let the state spend it on something else within like 20 miles away. So.
Okay. And folks are asking about like R&D funding in the omnibus bill, and if that's been increased or what the R&D funding looks like.
There aren't that many R&D specific accounts at DOT. Let me see what it was. The transport planning R&D one with the office of the secretary increased, but a bunch of that was is earmarks, like I said. And that's what the problem with research in general is, that it's mostly directed towards a specific university or specific consortia, and treated sort of no differently than an earmark would be anyway. FAA R&D is got a little cut from last year, actually. Not holding tight, but that was not really, aside from NHTSA, where they are putting serious money into data collection and R&D, and some of these traffic data safety grants from the BIF, let me think. Where was that? Yeah, there's a $100 million a year smart grant data program that's kind of similar to that out of the Office of the Secretary. But for the most part, R&D was not a high priority of the transportation part of the IIJA, and doesn't appear to be a huge new focus of the omnibus this year for regular appropriations.
And quite a few people are asking about proposals to suspend the gas tax, and how likely that might be and what effect that might have on federal transportation revenue.
It's a stupid idea, whose time may have come, unfortunately. I can't tell. I keep hearing different things as to whether or not, how seriously the administration is taking it. It's not as harmful as it would have been in the past. It's because we're now so conditioned to just writing a blank check and depositing money in the highway trust fund whenever it runs short. That if you suspend the gas tax till December 31st, it would take about $20 billion out of the highway trust fund. But so you would have to, which would have been a lot back in the day, but we just deposited $118 billion out of nowhere into the highway trust fund as part of the IIJA 3 months ago. So I've been of the opinion for the last several years that we should either mend it or end it on the highway trust fund. Either get it back to a user pay, user benefit, fully solvent system, or else junk the whole thing and find a new way to pay for transportation. And again, when you talk about junking the highway trust fund, the states would always get up in arms, but we need multi-year funding certainty. We can't do without it, and the trust fund allows that. And for big projects, it's true. They need that certainty. They don't really need it for repaving, but for big projects, they do. But we have just had this beautiful example in the IIJA of how you can have 5-year advance certainty without contract authority, without a trust fund. You need to make some fundamental changes in the budget process to make it easier to do these advance appropriations, because right now they had to declare them off-budget emergencies for some technical reasons, and you have to make some changes to the process to make it easier in things, for things like this, for capital only. But yeah, we have now seen a shining example of how you can have multi-year funding certainty and all that without a trust fund, without contract authority. So I haven't. My people at the White House, they might answer me honestly. They might just ignore me if I ask them, "Are you really going to do this stupid thing?" But we'll see. I mean, 18.3 cents at the refinery. There's no guarantee that they'll get passed on to the motorist by the time he gets to the service station, and the whipsaw that's going to be coming because of crude oil going from $90 to $140 a barrel and back to to 110 or whatever is going to vastly. It's going to change the price of gasoline vastly more than 18.3 cents a gallon in any 2 or 3 week period. So, I don't know. But I hope no, but it may happen anyway.
Well, I think related to that, somebody was wondering how likely it is that the advance appropriations in the IIJA actually survive to the end of fiscal year 26 without substantial rescissions.
You have to, Biden will veto any rescission, so you'd have. I don't see 2/3 of Congress overriding a veto to rescind this money anytime soon. You might play around the edges and if a program doesn't look like it's working out, they might reprogram some of it from a slow-moving program to a fast-moving program, maybe. But it's the Madisonian system. It's hard to get a law passed. And once it's in law, it's hard to get it repealed. The inertia, Madisonian inertia. So I believe that these advanced appropriations are going to stay on the books the whole time. Just getting even if the House if the House changes and we're so inclined to do it, getting 60 votes in the Senate to agree to a House bill rescinding the money, and then getting a president to sign it, and if he vetoes it, getting 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate to agree to override the veto. It's a tall order.
And so folks have a lot of questions too on the new grant programs, when guidance might be available, and if there's going to be a staffing increase at DOT in order to sort of staff some of these new programs, or what do we know about some of the new programs?
They have been working hard as they could in the confines of the CR on a lot of these grant NOFOs. Every time that some of the grant programs like RAISE, I believe there was a 60 or 90 day deadline for putting the NOFO out in IIJA. They've met that. I believe every time there's been a specific deadline in IIJ to take an action, they've done it so far, because I believe the lawyers at DOT may have interpreted that if there was actually a specific deadline, that overrode the provision in the CR saying don't do new things. And there were provisions in the advanced appropriations that provided that 1, 2, sometimes 3% of the money was set aside for oversight. You can hire people with that, and they're going to be able to staff up. Now, once the CR is done, and there are no restrictions on using any of their regular admin expenses on any of this stuff, or using the secretary's time to approve any of this stuff, you see a lot of this, get together fairly quickly. So there's the possibility, because so many of these things, if they're major rules or major grant announcements, have to be run through the White House Office of Management and Budget. It is possible that they will. There could be an eventual backlog that would build up there, but so far they've been doing this, having pretty good turnaround as well.
And somebody was asking about if there were any technical corrections to the IIJA in the fiscal year 2022 appropriations.
I forgot about that. Yes, in Division L of the Omnibus, which is Transportation HUD, Title 4 General Provisions, there are several, about 8 or 9 provisions making technical corrections into parts of the IIJA. But first of all, they're only correcting. The appropriations committees are only correcting errors that the appropriations committees made themselves in their part of the bill, the advanced appropriations in Division J. If there are any other errors in other parts of the bill, the appropriators didn't deal with them. That's someone else's problem. In particular, when they drafted the EV program, the EV formula program, there were some internal reference areas because it was a giant, like 4,000 word one run-on sentence, the way they had to write it, and they lost track of which was the 23rd paragraph versus the 26th. They had to renumber some things, so they fixed those, but they did not add the. This is the problem with the IJ. Was run by a group of 10 senators who they assigning things randomly. Whoever was assigned to do the page in the summary document that had the transit rural ferry stuff, they said at the top of the larger type, it said 1.25 billion for rural ferries, and then below it, said 1 billion for some kind of ferry and 250 million for one ferry. They were supposed to be added together, but because one was in larger type at the top and the others were in smaller type beneath it, I guess it was assumed that that was the top was a header summary and the other two. So there was $1.25 billion in rural ferry money that the people the 10 senators said they intended to have in there, but their document didn't really make it clear, and it didn't make it into the actual law. That didn't get added back. They didn't add any new money. Sinema had wanted that in her corrections package. No new money added, but there were several other corrections to the language in Division J of IIJA that were made by this omnibus. Yes.
Well, Jeff, we have just 1 minute left, so I'm going to ask you just one question from the audience, the most important question maybe. They want to make sure that we as Eno are providing you with enough resources for the caffeine you need to continue doing these presentations and analysis. So just want you to confirm with everyone, do you have enough caffeine to continue this work?
I'll go out and get more. This is caffeine-free diet ginger ale, but I will go back and get the Diet Mountain Dew here in a minute. But I'm back to. I'm too old to stay up overnight. I'm like a zombie for the next day, but I'm past the zombie period now, back in the groove again.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jeff, and thank you everyone for joining us. As I said earlier, we will be sending you the slides and the presentation. So don't worry about all of that. You'll get that in your email. And again, make sure you sign up for our mailing list to make sure you get connected to all upcoming things and join our next webinar. And thank you very much. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you very much, Karen.
Thanks, Jeff.